monsters, diarrhea, and child mutilation. Oh yeah, we're back in the Abyss. Made in Abyss, the golden city of the scorching sun was an experience unlike any other, separating itself quite a bit from the previous season and movie. Even if the story isn't for you, there's no doubt that the production, performances, and scale of this season created a brutal and beautiful masterwork from Studio Cinema Citrus. From the grotesque to the downright wholesome, this is the most abyssy Made in Abyss has ever been, and it was a worthy continuation. Although, at times, I did find it to be a bit confusing. AKA, some things flew right over my head, and I'm not quite sure what to make of them. Beware of spoilers from here on out. This season picks up immediately where the incredible Dawn of the Deep Soul film left off, with Reg, Rico, and Nanachi traveling down into the 6th layer of the Abyss, where humans cannot return from. Supposedly. Let's start off with what I loved, because this was definitely a great season with a lot of good, meaty bits, and not just the people. This season introduces an interweaving storyline set about 150 years in the past, which lays the groundwork for the setting and characters the main trio will interact with throughout. This was a fantastic idea. Getting to know Vuko, Beloff, Iram Yui, and of course Wazukian was the perfect complementary experience to the introduction of the 6th layer, and was the most heartbreaking this season got. The Ganja expedition is the strong point this go-around. Other elements that I appreciated were the setting, mystery, and world building. But more than any of those, the continued skill at balancing tones is perhaps what this series does best of all. The tightrope Made in Abyss walks between wonder and dread is astonishingly well crafted, and the consistent element that makes the series so unique. Even throughout the bloody climax, the story still managed to insert moments of awe. The setting of this mysterious village filled with sentient hollows who don't understand the kids was a really great way to set up the arc and establish how different everything will be going forward. There's an air of unease as they traverse the market and barely make out what the inhabitants are saying. It didn't help the audience's image of these people that Prushka had just been stolen earlier. By making the audience suspicious of these citizens, the story was able to paint them as a red herring group of villains early on, before pulling the rug out from under us. This season continues to subvert expectations when it comes to series villains, by not having any outside of the Abyss itself. Bondrewd being the big exception, but he does have his supporters. The reason for the conflict everyone's in isn't because of one person's actions, but just like the story describes, it was the result of an accumulation of actions from multiple people over decades. That sentiment works so well with the climax, because who is the villain of this story? Fapata, Wazukian, the Ganja expedition, the villagers? None of them are villainous people, and by the end, they all come to understand each other's perspectives. Even the vicious feasting of flesh is turned from a horror to a sacrificial thing of beauty to repay a debt. It's awesome how the series is able to tell such dark and complicated stories without pointing fingers at a big bad and blaming them for everything naughty in the world. Throughout the season, we also learn more about Reg, which seems like something the series will milk until the very end of the story, which I'm down for. Fabuta and Gabaroon knew Reg before he lost his memories. Gabaroon informs us and Reg that they are interference units, but he doesn't believe that he and Reg are from the same creator, which is interesting. Reg seems to be a very special case, given his incinerator. Perhaps he's some kind of weapon designed for the very purpose of reshaping the Abyss. Anyway, the craziest part of all this is that Reg's original name is Reg. Now that is actually an insane reveal, the meaning of which I can't even begin to comprehend, or it's just a quick gag that I'm reading too much into. Then there's the mystery of this place. The front half of the season is all about uncovering threats to the group as they are slowly surrounded by the inhabitants of the 6th layer. This was a great hook, especially with otherworldly powers like the balancing popping up, as well as some white whistle whittler who gets off on carving. Never mind. The people were intriguing, there was a sense of danger around every corner, and I had no idea how this was all going to tie into the Ganja expedition. Until that horror show is strung out before our eyes in a disturbing, heartbreaking flashback that finally explains the village's existence and Fapata's desire. The ebb and flow from wonder to nihilistic emptiness delivers an excellent payoff that cleanly connects to the present day easily, plus, just overall, yuck. Some of the issues I had with this season come from the use of the main trio. Rico and Nanachi didn't really have anything interesting to do once the plot really got moving, and that was a damn shame. Although, it's not like they were just sitting on their asses. Well, at least not all the time. As strange as it is to say, I'm glad the show had Riko suffering from extreme diarrhea as a consequence of her adventuring personality. That realism keeps this insane world grounded. I like that she was put on the back burner for a while, actually interacting with the locals and learning their language. Her relationship with Thick Ma was her highlight for this season. On the flip side, I thought the Nanachi and Midi thing wasn't that interesting. I understand why Nanachi would act that way if this was reality, but having Nanachi bogged down in another Midi-centric story so soon after that had just wrapped up felt a bit lazy. The story of Midi and Nanachi is one of the high points of the series, but if the plot keeps going back to that well over and over, eventually interest will dry up and Nanachi will feel one note. Although, by the time the climax comes, Nanachi does have the most badass scene of the season when they roll up with Pilaf. Riko also plays a small role here or there, but in the finale, these two are really just being moved around by other characters without much impact on events. It felt like they really had nothing to do with the culmination of the season, and that was a bit of a disappointment. By the climax, the story is really all about Fabata, her instinctual grudge against the village, her relationship with Reg, and the background trauma of Vuko. By laying the dramatic impact of the entire season on a character who was just introduced, the story put a lot of pressure on an unknown entity to carry things over the finish line, and I don't quite think it worked. Her arc of going from a 2D killing machine to developing her own dreams and a complex personality was interesting, but centering the climax around that one character arc made the finale feel flat. There were a lot of loose threads established throughout the season that seemed like they were set up to have more of an impactful payoff by the end. The balancing and the concept of value within the village that was so important at the beginning felt kind of forgotten about. I think it ultimately served to transform Fapata into Super Saiyan mode, but I'm not quite sure. I still don't really understand what the balancing was, if it was Irumyui or Vuko or just the nature of those black tendril things. I was expecting something to click with me about the thematic purpose of the balancing and value, but it never did. That could 100% be a me problem. This season deserves a rewatch anyway. I also didn't really understand Wazukian at all. That's part of his character, but for there to be no solid answers about one of the central figures of this season, whose actions were a large part of the ongoing intrigue, was a bit of a letdown. After being freed and giving the village history, even Vuko felt like she was just kind of there, not doing much. That brings me to the end of the season. Vuko being transformed into a hollow and her final exchange with Fapata was a very touching send-off for the character. Fapata discovering the secret connection to her mother, and Vuko getting to feel like she was finally saying goodbye to Irumyui was a moment that I loved and wish we got just a bit more from. I also came to appreciate what we saw of the relationship between Gabaroon and Fapata. The main cast journey is also wrapped up in a nice way, especially with Reg. Learning more about himself through his interactions with Fapata was a clever throughline to also set up his clear romantic feelings, which really came out of left field to me. Not that I have a problem with it, I just always saw Reg and Riko as an inevitability, so it was interesting seeing a different dynamic. There was also a subtle but meaningful moment when Reg stepped forward before Riko to invite Fapata to join their adventure that I appreciated, and I'm so glad she said no. Not because I don't like her, but because it doesn't fit with her journey to just immediately up and leave with people she doesn't know. Plus, I do think that would really mess with the dynamic of the main characters. These three need a bit more time to develop before admitting a new member. All in all, Made in Abyss, the Golden City of the Scorching Sun, was a wonderful achievement for visual storytelling. Made in Abyss is one of the most unique things out there. It's charming and terrifying while telling the story of an adventure into hell. A modern Dante's Inferno with a tendency toward child torture. The story of the Sixth Layer, the Ganja Expedition, and Fapata's Revenge were a welcome addition to this epic tale that had some issues here and there, but ultimately made for more must-watch television if you have the stomach for constant misery. Thank you for watching, and until the next time, I'll shut up.